Hello and welcome. My name is Bill Chestnut. I'm an Azure MVP, and I'm a cloud platform and API evangelist for 6pivot. 6pivot's a Brisbane-based company, but I live and work here in Melbourne. Spend not as much lately traveling, but I do spend a lot of time traveling. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of an overview of the Azure DevOps Pipelines and a specific example of deploying a Dynamics 365 CE solution. My details, the slides will be available. So again, the agenda is a quick overview of just DevOps in general. If you haven't seen the Azure DevOps, look at the DevOps pipelines for building. I've just got an example of a .NET Core website. And then an example of deploying a Dynamics 365 CE solution. I don't take any credit for the CE solution. I found an example out on the web and just reproduced it. So it'll be a good reproduction. And then just a little bit of a summary. So a little bit of a history of Azure DevOps. I don't know, I'm showing my age probably with that top one, SourceSafe. And yes, I did a lot of work with SourceSafe. I've repaired at least 2 corrupted SourceSafe databases. And then it went to the Visual Studio Team, and then Team Foundation Server, Visual Studio Online, and then the latest iteration of it is Azure DevOps. And it's got components of, it's got the boards where you can manage your work that you're doing, so in an agile way, or there's a couple of different ones you can do there. And then you've also got Kanban there also. Then you've got and one of the biggest changes they made when they went to kind of Visual Studio Online was they adopted Git as a repo type. So you used to have the TFVC, but they've also now, you've got a choice in each of your team projects of whether you want it to be TFVC or Git. Almost everybody's going towards Git. I was a strong advocate of TFVC and really hated Git to start with, but I've adopted. So, and then we've got our pipelines, test plans, and artifacts. Artifacts is probably the newest of the group of things, and if anybody here knows Mitch Denny, started with Redify, and Mitch and I were working for Redify. He was program manager until recently of the artifacts at Microsoft in Redmond. And we'll talk about that. Very similar to the NuGet packages. A little bit of history of the DevOps pipelines. How many people had the fun experience of building the DevOps, the pipelines in the Windows workflow? You saved regularly because it crashed on a regular basis. So what they did is they adopted, and few of you might know Paul Stovall, another ex-Redify person. He's the person that started Octopus Deploy. And basically, if you look at the task structure of Octopus and the task structure of the new build engine in Azure DevOps, they look very, very, very similar. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The other what components we have in the pipeline are our build. So we've got a whole set of build tasks. We've got release. Release wasn't in it at the beginning. It's been added. And if you're running on-premise version, I think it was 2015 update 2 got you the release components. Or no, got you the build components. And then 2017 got you the release components. We've also got a library where we can have sets of variables. So if we use variables across different environments, we can have those. We've also got task groups, so it allows us to group a set of tasks so that we can repeat those tasks across many builds or releases. Deployment groups, haven't really dug too much in it. It's an attempt to kind of say these machines are production, these machines are UAT, things like that. And then you still have access to the old style workflow builds. They get listed in there. And if you've got any time whatsoever, convert them. It's so much easier to do the new ones. One of the other nice things they've got is a whole set of build agents. They supply a whole set of them, and then you can also do your own hosted build agent. So, and you'll notice that there's not all Windows. So you've got Linux, Mac OS, and you've got containers. And I updated that slide, but it didn't update for some reason. There's VS 2017 on a Windows 2016 platform. They've also got VS 2019 on a Windows 2019 platform. So, and you've also got some tasks that will run agentless. And why would you want to run something on an agentless platform? So one of the things I've done, and a few people might know, my background is a lot of BizTalk, and BizTalk doesn't run on any of the hosted build agents. You have to have your own build server. So I've built a virtual machine in Azure. I run all the BizTalk components on that virtual machine. And trying to save money, I really didn't want that machine running 100% of the time. And when I wanted to do a build, I wanted. So what I did is I created a build for BizTalk that has an agentless component to start with. That agentless component runs a Azure command to start my virtual machine. It then goes on to the self-hosted agent step. That waits for that virtual machine to come up and for the agent on that virtual machine to register itself. Then it starts the build on that BizTalk server. And then when it finishes, I run another agentless step that shuts the virtual machine down. I'm going to try to get a little bit smarter with that and say, okay, if it's business hours, once it starts, leave it up until the end of the day and use auto shutdown on it. But I haven't got to that point. But that's why you might want to run that agentless piece, is so that you can do things like that. So the build pipelines, basically we have to pick what agent we want to run it on. We want to pick the tasks that we want to use. The other thing that's nice about the tasks is there's a very large ecosystem out there right now of people putting their tasks in the marketplace for you to use. And I would say probably 90% of them are free. There's a few of them that people charge for, but 90% of them are free. Like one of them I picked up the other day was, it takes the output from an ARM template, looks through the output variables, and publishes those back into DevOps as variables so that you can use them in subsequent steps. And that brings me to variables. So I can set my variables. The variables can be a variable across all of the release and build, or it can be just a particular environment. We can trigger based on, like, if I check into a repository, that can force a build. If I'm checking in a lot, I can have it batch those up. I can also trigger on a schedule. So I want to do, if I've got a very large software project, I don't want to do builds during the day as often. I can have it schedule build overnight. And I can trigger on whichever branch I want. If I only want to trigger on commits to the master branch, I can do that. Got a lot of options for setting how it actually works. I can also set how long I keep the builds. So if a build has failed, I may only want to keep it a week, but if it works, I may want to keep it a month, 3 months. I also may want to mark a build to be kept longer if that build actually gets deployed. And then we've got the history of what's happened to our build pipeline or our release pipeline. Some of this has changed a little bit. They've introduced YAML, which is a build definition that lives with your source code. So it's a file in your source repository that drives your build. So it's kind of the next step of configuration in code. So it's the build definitions in code. I'm working on another talk at the moment. Basically, it's Azure DevOps to YAML or not to YAML. It depends, and it's interesting because I'm doing some work with a customer right now that's doing a lot of builds where they do the exact same build steps across like 35 projects. And if I have YAML, I have a file that I have to edit in 35 projects if I want to make a change. If I'm using the classic pipeline, I make a change once, and that gets propagated against all 35 of those. So a little bit we'll talk about in there. The release pretty much has the same things as we saw just then in the build, so except that it has stages that you can set, so across your different environments. But it pretty much has everything else that we want to do in there. This is a little bit starting to talk about that difference between the classic UI to do your builds and YAML. So it's an interesting discussion, and it's funny, a lot of the people that are using YAML reminds me of what Mitch said about BizTalk when we were first talking about BizTalk, is that he didn't like it because he couldn't go into Notepad and build it. You had to use the UI. So YAML's a bit that way, so it's basically a particular syntax to define what you want to do in your build. And what I found most people doing is they go into the classic, they put it into a build, and then there's an option there to look at the YAML that it produced. Not sure whether that's a good sign for YAML or not, but I tend to go more in the UI. If I'm in a situation where I've got a bunch of projects that are very unique in the way they build, YAML is definitely a better way to do that because it stays with the source, which means that I could probably do a build, say, on GitHub with the YAML in there, take it to another platform, use that same type of build in that other platform, where the classic is Azure DevOps only. So, and you'll see, I don't have the full YAML there, but you'll see that it does very similar steps. It's doing a NuGet install, a NuGet restore, a solution build, test, and publishing the artifacts. So, and that's what we're going to go look at now. So that's what I kind of ran through that a little bit quicker, just because I want to spend more time actually get to the right screen, looking at the actual builds. So what I did today, I found out about this talk, I think Wednesday, because you needed somebody to fill in a gap. So I put some of this together pretty quick. And what I've got is I've got a couple of repositories out here. I have a .NET Core web app that I've got building and deploying with the classic pipeline. And I've got pretty much the same thing with a YAML deploy. It's pretty much the same code. So we'll go down to our pipeline here, and we'll bring up the classic build pipeline first. And you'll see that basically we have our pipeline that picks the agent pool for the overall pipeline, but each one of these agents can have a different agent. So you could, like I said, do that one step or one job agentless, then go to the self-hosted, and then back to agentless. But this one is just inheriting from that. Then you do your get source. This is one of the things that Microsoft surprised a lot of people about, is they pretty much are supporting any source repository out there that you want to use to build from. So it does not have to be the Azure DevOps repository. It can be pretty much any of those. We'll talk a little bit at the end on some pricing on that, and it'll surprise you on some of the open source stuff that they're doing. And then we just basically go through each one of these steps. It defines what the build looks like. And one of the nice things is like I said about the marketplace, these are tasks that we can have, But if we basically go up here to the marketplace, there are a lot of tasks that are here. So you can search through those. So like if you would rather have, instead of getting an email out of your build, you'd rather have a notification go on to Slack so that you can go check it and cut down some of the noise you're getting in email. You've got Slack integration there. You've got a lot of different things in there that you can use. The only thing I hate about it, the site, when you click on browse the marketplace, takes you away, doesn't pop a new window. And then all you have to do when you want to do that is you basically go here, you pick the marketplace one. So if you've gone here to the marketplace one, you pick it and get it for free. It takes you off to an install page, and it adds it to your DevOps instance. You do have to be a collection administrator to install those. If you're not, I think it will queue those up for your collection administrator to approve. So, but everyone, if you're interested in this, everyone should have their own DevOps instance. You can get it, 5 users for free. So you can have your own instance of DevOps out there. And again, you can go pick up any of these extra tasks that you might need. There's really no guarantee on some of these whether they're going to work the way you expect them to work, so just be a little bit careful sometimes. I've had to try 2 or 3 of them before I got one to work exactly the way I wanted it to. So if we look at that one now, and then we'll go see that I ran a build with that, and I can open up that build, and you can see that I've got all the steps of the build. They executed successfully. They got a nice little green check mark. I can go into pretty much any of those now and see a really good log of what's happened. And that's not even with the debugging turned on. You get heaps more on that. And if you do want to, you can actually go in there and you can download all of the logs. And it pulls down a zip file that you can unzip if you're looking for something in particular with that. I don't have any tests in this, but you do get a test summary. And then that basically shows you what happened with that build. And then if you want to look at what artifacts came out of the build, you can go there. There's a drop that it creates. And then that shows you the files that are in that drop. So that's what I need to deploy this application. So let's go and look at the same thing, but in the YAML version of that. I'm going to go to the repository first, and if we go look at the YAML one, we'll see we've got an Azure Pipelines.yml file. That is the actual build definition. It's part of the source repository. But we go into the pipelines, we can see it in there, and then we can go edit it. And again, it's basically all of the tasks that we have. Now, they're in the process of changing this a bit for the release. They've introduced stages, but at the moment, that's in preview on there. It does have the ability for me now to go in here, move my cursor to a certain spot, and go pick one of these other tasks, and it will put the YAML in there for me. So it does a lot for that. I started, if you go and do a new pipeline, you've got a choice of Classic or YAML, and it will give you a bunch of scenarios. Like there was a scenario already in there for a ASP.NET Core web application. So it basically put all the steps in there. It was funny, in the Classic, it put the publish artifacts. In the YAML, it didn't. So I had to go back and add the publish artifacts to that. Because a lot of people that are using YAML aren't actually doing a build separate from the release. They're putting it all together, so they don't really need to publish the artifacts in there. But again, that's basically a build, same as exactly steps as the other one's doing. So if we go look at that now, I don't know what it thought I changed, but you'll see that there I've done 2 of those with YAML, and I get pretty much the same look and feel there. I've got all of my the logs pretty much the same way as I have for my classic. So there's no real differentiation in the way it works. I can pick in the YAML. I can also pick what build agent I want to run on, whether it's hosted or my own. All of that stuff works. I can download the logs. So there's not a lot of difference. It's doesn't come down to a technical difference. It's kind of a preference, whether you want to have you build definitions with your code. There might be advantages to that if it's like an open source project. You want people to be able to pull down and build. So you've got that YAML in there so they can go from there. But other than that, there's real no difference. At the moment, if we start talking about release, there is a little bit of a difference because back in our build, if we go into like the .NET one, it already knows that I have a release for it, so it doesn't give me an option up, or actually I think it does here. Yes, I can hit the release button and it will try to create a release pipeline for me, knowing what it knows about the build. YAML does the same, but at the moment, the YAML creates a classic release pipeline instead of a YAML release pipeline, because at the moment, YAML it's starting to support stages. So that's like when we go into the release here, we'll see that we have our artifacts coming from our build, and then we've got, say, a pre-production, and then all I have to do is I can go in here and I can clone the pre-production, and then go in and change its name to production, and then I can go into the tasks, and most likely in this particular case, I'm doing a Azure deployment, so I would pick a different subscription or a different resource group to be my production. And then I can also go up here. This one doesn't have any variables, but I can have variables that are scoped to either all of the releases or to just the pre-production or production release. And then let's go back here real quick. I'm going to leave that, so I'm not going to change it, but I'll go back to my here, and this is basically my pre-production release. I download the artifacts, and then I deploy to Azure, so there's basically the log from that deployment. And then if I go here, this is basically where I'm just running, because the sample I built was an API, so there's once it's deployed to Azure, I can run that off of the Azure websites.net. And then if we go and look, the YAML, it's not any different because basically what they did is they created a classic release pipeline at the moment. They will be shortly switching it to create a YAML because they've got the stage support. If you want to turn on the stage support now, you can go into your settings and do preview features, and then you can turn on multi-stage pipelines for the YAML, and it will start creating multi-stage pipelines for your YAML. So that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover with the builds. And again, actually what I will do, I'll do a new build. And what it asks you to do is to pick your repository. So if I say, actually, let me start this again. One of the tricks that gets a lot of people caught when they do this is that I'll do a new build here. Now, these are all going to build YAML build definitions. You have to actually go down here and say, I want to use the classic editor to get to that. But doesn't matter here. You pick the repository, and then it gives you some classic build scenarios, and then you can show more. And basically, it will do those. You can pick one of those. It'll put those set of steps in there with your repository. And it does the same thing if we go back to here and do a new and pick the classic editor. It does pretty much the same thing. It asks me what repository and then gives me the samples. or I can just start with an empty job. It's up to me on that. Okay, so let's hop back to the slides real quick. That's what we want to cover on that. And again, in the 45 minutes, I was just trying to go fairly high level on that. A few other things that we can do in those pipelines is that we can create task groups. So if you look at that classic pipeline, you can highlight multiple steps and create a task group. And what it'll see is if you've got any parameters in those task groups, it'll expose those parameters up at the task group level, and you set those. So what I've been able to do with this one customer is they've got like 35 projects that do the exact same build steps, and the only thing that's different is the repository name. So basically what I've done is a task group that's got all the steps in it. When I create a new build for one of those projects, all I have to do is I add that task group in there, and I set a variable. And that's all I have to do to create a new build for another client. So that makes it really easy to do. I'm in the process, though. Their previous developer, this client, had decided he couldn't figure out how to do it in the classic, so he did a YAML. Now I've got about 20 YAMLs to go back and incorporate back in. So you get those. Variables, you can also have variable groups. So you can put a set of variables into a group if you're going to use those across multiple pieces. You can also export and import the task groups. Because the problem that you also run into in Azure DevOps is there is the concept of a team project, and you cannot share task groups across team projects. They're unique to that, so that's why you have to import and export. Or the fact they now support multiple repositories in the same team project. There's some decisions you have to make of whether you have a separate team project or whether you put them all into one. But I will show you real quickly that there is a nice feature here in the repos that allow you to go up here and say, import repository. So you can basically go from either another Azure DevOps repository and bring it in. So that's what I've been doing. When they converted from their in-house Git repository, they made them all team projects, which I don't want that because I want to do all my time planning and all of that kind of stuff in one. So I've imported all the repositories into there. And then you can manage repositories here, so you can see that you can have, this one's got 3 different Git repositories, because different from the way TFVC used to work, you'd have one for a project and you'd have a bunch of solutions in there. With Git, you tend to have a solution per repository. Just because the way a lot of people work with it. So let's hop back to here. So now what we're going to do is talk about this example of taking and deploying a Dynamics 365 CE solution with DevOps. So what you have to do, you need a repository in DevOps or GitHub or one of the tools where you put the unpacked solution. Customization file, when you export it, you get the zip and the handled zip. So there's a tool that will unzip those into the XML files. And if we go look here in our repository, let's go here. No, that's not the right one. Hold on. So basically, there's this is a simple customization they already had out there. And there's the 3 XML files that make up that customization. So we've got that in the repo. Then you basically have a build step that packages that up again. So repackages that up in the zip file in the managed zip. And then you publish that as a build artifact. So now I've got a build artifact of that. Then I can go into my release pipeline and I define variables that will connect me to all of the environments that I want to release that package into. And then you go and do that. So let's go and look at that. So here basically is my solution. There's my customizations. They're saved in the repository. I go in here to my build pipeline. And one of the things about the build pipeline is because almost every one of those tasks is some JSON configuration and some PowerShell. So you can pretty much do anything you want to with PowerShell. I've even done one recently where PowerShell was turning out to be too hard to do. So I wrote a .NET component. I built it, and I made a artifact out of it. So there's a new artifact type called a universal package, which basically you just throw files into. And then in my build step, I brought in the download the universal package, and it puts it into my working folder. And then I run a command line that runs that .NET executable and passes it some parameters. So there is pretty much nothing you can't do in the build, because you're either doing PowerShell, or you even write your own .NET components, or you get something off the marketplace. So if we look at this one, we'll edit this guy. And the first thing we need to do is we want to get the latest version of NuGet, because I've had a lot of problems with a lot of things. That I'm recording this, plus I'm going to make the slides available. So, and then we need to install the CRM SDK core tools. So basically, we do a NuGet install for that package, and we put it into a folder called tools. It puts it in there with this weird package numbering on the end of it. So they had a little thing in here that makes up a core tools folder, and then it goes out and finds exactly what folder it's in, and then it moves everything from that folder back to the core tools so that you know exactly where to find it. You don't have to worry about the numbering, and then basically gets rid of that install folder. So basically now I have my NuGet and my tools that I need. So the next one is running the solution packager. This is the same thing that you would download onto your machine if you were doing this yourself. There's the packager. You point it to, tell it what you want it to do. You point it to where the file, what the file wants to be called, and basically where everything's at. There's a solution path, which is passed as an environment variable, and that's a variable that I have defined up here in my build. So my solution path is solution, and that's based off the root of my Git repository. And then basically, once I'm done with that, because this is actually putting them in the build artifact staging directory, I then publish the build artifact staging directory as my artifacts. So if we go and look at the build that I ran here, and we'll look at, there's all the steps that executed. One of the things I find handy in here is that I use a command one if I'm not sure where it's going to put the stuff when it runs. Like I wasn't sure how that install of the core tools was going to run. I've got a command one command line script in there that does a directory star.star/s. So basically, it shows me everything in all the folders and everything of what's there, so that I can go find it. It's just a little cheat tool of finding how it works, because you're running in a hosted build server. You can't just go look at the directories. So now if we look at the artifacts, we'll see here in my drop folder, I have my packed solution, and there's my managed and my unmanaged zip files. And then let's go to the release. The release I haven't run because I didn't really feel like blowing away my sandbox if this thing didn't work, so I didn't do that at the moment. So if I edit this now, and I do something very similar in this one, the difference with the release is that I need to tell it where to get the artifacts, so which build created the artifacts I want to use. And then I go in here for my development, and I install the XRM Data PowerShell. So basically, I do a PowerShell install. And then I do an import solution. So the first thing I do is I create a connection to my CRM, passing it some variables. So here's an environment variable. These are all defined up here in my variables. And you can, with the password stuff, you can actually hit the little lock here, and it doesn't show up in here that you can see. And then basically it runs the import CRM solution, passing it the connection and the link, the location of the managed zip file. So I ran it, but it didn't work. So we can go look at that. But you'll see that it got a import solution got a timeout, or it couldn't find that instance of Dynamics. But the other pieces, if you go look at the previous one, there it basically packed that, ran that pack. So again, if you've got custom steps you need to do in there, you've got packet PowerShell, you've got command line, you've got pretty much anything you want to use, always go check the marketplace. You're not going to be the first one to do this. I haven't, even some of the stuff that I've done, I'm not the first one to do it. It's somebody else has already fought this battle. So basically, there's a lot of good examples out there. And again, all you have to do, if I want to take now in my release, I've got it working, say, to my development environment, I basically can go say, clone that, and then if I go up here to my variables, you'll see now it automatically cloned the development variables to the copy of that, so you would change their values for whatever that other environment wants to be called, and be able to execute those. So, basically a lot of power in this. So, again, pretty much anything you want to do. And again, you also can create variable groups. So if you want to group the variables, if you're going to use them across multiple deploys, so if everything deploying to your production group is going to use the same name of the instance, the logon and password, you put it in once. That way, if you change it, you don't have to go change it 6 or 8 times. So basically, and then you can, this is a new feature, you can put the passwords in something like Azure Key Vault, so you don't have to key them into your DevOps. You can get them from there, things like that. So that's pretty much what we want to talk about with that. I was hoping I could run it, but I just ran out of time getting another instance of CRM up and going. Not my forte. I'm an integration developer. But let's go back to here. That's basically the steps that we did. And I've got the reference to where I found all this in one of the slides, so you can go look at that. So I did that. So a little bit about the DevOps costs. Private projects, with the pipeline side of things, you can get a free private project for 5 users. And any users that have a MSDN subscription are free. So if you have 5 users, so that could be your project managers and your BAs if you want them to be involved, and then your developers if they've got Visual Studio subscription, they get included for free. So they just bumped this up. It used to be a lot less on the minutes, but now they've gone to, you get, in your free one, you get a 1 build pipeline, so you can run 1 build at a time. Everything runs sequential, and it gets 1,800 minutes a month. So that's a fair bit of build time that you get. You get one of the self-hosted ones too, so you can run that as much as you want. You get one of those in there. If you want an extra unlimited parallel job, it's $54 and change a month. So depending on how you want to do that. With the private, if you're hosting your build agent, you get one of those. Another self-hosted build agent's $20 a month. Open source projects. So if your repository is marked as public, either on GitHub or on Azure DevOps, you get 10 unlimited build pipelines to run from. So they've kind of gone after the open source community with that. So again, if you're doing something that you're going to release publicly anyway, you might as well make it a a public repository, and then you don't have to pay anything to get that. So, summary, basically, you get back up. 5 users for free, and anyone extra with MSDN. Pipelines can work from almost any repo. The only ones I've run into issues with, if they're inside of your firewall, it doesn't know how to get to those, but if it's any kind of publicly available ones, you can get to them. You can run almost any task in a pipeline because you can run a .NET component, you can run PowerShell, you can run one of the tasks available. Justin Yo, from here in Melbourne, another one of the MVPs, has just published a series of blog posts on how to create your own custom task. So package it up properly as a task so that you can put it in the marketplace. And again, the easier you make it for your developers, so going to those other environments instead of them having to do it. I implemented for some BizTalk stuff for one of the companies I was working with, and it went from taking the developers out of developing 3 hours to deploy to the project manager can now deploy in about 6 clicks. So, which saved them a lot of time. So, here are the references that I had from this. So that's the one talking about the steps. It's got all of those PowerShell components in there. And then they've got the sample file that I used in that GitHub repository. So here's my contact details. And I'm just about out of time. Thank you very much.